Welcome to the podcast Following Spirit Without Hesitation, stories from journeys of deepening trust. And I'm Tania, and I'm here to share what's becoming a bit of a mini-series of the Magic Road, the Unexpected Pilgrimage, and this is part 3. So I wonder where we will go with this, with my story around this adventure through Europe. So I'd just like to review some things, just to fill in some of the gaps, okay, from what I shared last time. And one of the things that feels significant, I'd mentioned earlier that trees were really a big part of that journey, the cherry especially, that mulberry also came through in Hungary, as well as walnut. Now, walnut represents the two hemispheres of the brain. I mean, literally, a walnut looks like a brain. So, it's left brain and right brain. And that deep wisdom. All trees are wisdom keepers. But this is very much about that, again, the union that we met in Hungary. And also the other thing that came up in Hungary when we went to the other side of the lake was there was a dedication to Pan, the god of nature, there as well, which again was a significant part of this journey. So yes, it was following these pilgrimages throughout Europe, but there's also this sort of very strong nature spirit that was emerging through Pan, through the trees, and through other beings who are present. We may see a little bit more of that when we get to Croatia more fully. I also mentioned that in Serbia, that it was more about receiving rather than doing any work, okay? But one of the things that happened, which was really magical, and there was a lot of magic in Serbia, I'm not talking about that, but it was, again, it was almost such, there's something like a coalescence really that happened with that. But one of the really magical things that happened was we went to a Benedictine monastery, and I have a fondness for the Benedictines. My feeling is that they're descended from the Desert Fathers, and they were kind of brought into the Catholic Church. So they didn't originate from within the Catholic Church. That's my feeling around that. Yeah. What more can I say? But if you think the Desert Fathers have that connection to the Essenes, and Yeshua, spent that time out in the desert. So I feel that there is an interconnection there within those origins. So we'd gone to this Benedictine monastery that was for men, for monks, and so there was a sort of restricted access for women, as there often is. But the church was within the monastery walls. And so we went through the main gates of the monastery, and the church, on the church walls, the bees had started to make a hole in the wall, and they were starting to build a hive within the walls of the monastery. And it really felt for me at the time, it's very strongly representative of Sophia, the Divine Mother. And I'd had this oil from this saint whose name I can't remember at the moment, but again, very sort of that deep feminine energy. And I put a few drops, I was guided to put a few drops of that to just bring in a little bit more softness and feminine energy to support the bees and what they were doing, literally breaking down the walls. Like I say, I have a strong love for the Benedictines, and in my experience from other places, that there's a mixture, as there is within any tradition or any system. There's a mixture of those who are perhaps more contained by the dogma and those who are more open. I can't comment on that within this particular Serbian monastery. I can only comment from my experience in Britain, but it really felt like, the feminine is starting to break down the walls of that, the patriarchal aspects of that masculine structure, if you like. So that was very, very significant. And so I'd left Serbia, and I crossed the border over into Croatia. My original plan, I should have learned by now, right? Any plans were going to be undone and remade. Okay. So I'd left Serbia, and Croatia was just absolutely beautiful. My original plan was to just go through Croatia, drop down to the coast. I knew that was really important, and to go back to Italy. Simple. Go to Rome, go to the Vatican, and that. So I was just going to whiz through Croatia. That's not what happened. I ended up, again, just following the guidance. And there's these mountains in Croatia that are part of, they're kind of outliers of the Alps. I can't remember their name, but Croatia, there's mountains, there's marshes, there's islands, there's coast, so, and there's a kind of vibrancy. And again, there was this light. I went to these marshes, and I stayed there. There was a lovely campsite there. And what was really interesting in that campsite was that on the ceiling of the office part, there was a compass, or a medicine wheel, if you like. And I was like, okay, I'm obviously meant to be here. And there was very strong fish energy, shall we say. And what's really interesting for me, from what I understand, is the fish symbolism is often associated with snake or serpent symbolism. So there, it's kind of not always, but in some cases, it's kind of become a muted version. If you think, it's still got the scales, and so very often, like I say, in my experience, it's a kind of toned down version to make it more palatable, if you like. So I'm always curious when I start to see this fish symbolism. But these marshes were absolutely beautiful, and just filled with this palpable light, like that place in Italy. And I'd sort of wandered through the village, and this fish symbolism was everywhere. It was on the houses, and it's a significant part of this particular village. And I'd gone down to the marshes. There was a place where you could get boats, but I wasn't going to be there long enough to be able to book onto one of the boats. And this is where things get interesting. My guidance was, say, to go and book. But there was clearly one of the people who was working there, again, who was himself so filled with light. It was really just to connect with that person. Possibly he was a land guardian, but definitely on the path, because there was that recognition, and there are very often just these moments, this kind of by being in each other's energetic field, there's this transfer of information and confirmation, if you like. Yeah, you're on the right path. So that was beautiful. There were lots of herons and other sort of birds that fish in the area, and the story there, it's a really magical story. Was again, it's about the waters, and there was a lot of fishing, I believe. I'm probably, without looking it up, I'm not getting the story completely accurate, but there was a lot of fishing in the area, and I believe the marshes were starting to sort of drain away, and there was this, or maybe there's probably agriculture as well, and so there was a lot of concern about, you know, the lack of the reduction of resource. And there was a couple who lived in the area at the time, and something happened that made the water level rise up. And when the water level rose up and expanded beyond the marsh boundary and then went back again, there was a lot of fish then caught within the grasses, or the reeds, if you like, around the edges of the marsh. So the villages, or the around the area, were then sustained with all of this fish. So that story sounds very familiar from one of the biblical stories. And I love how these different layers and levels and work through in different places. So I really enjoyed my brief time there, and so I went on my way, and as I say, I was heading down towards the coast and went through the mountains, and this is when things started to get really bizarre, shall we say, and why Croatia has become so special to me. That I started to meet beings like of other realms, so not necessarily in the physical, really unusual beings that aren't perhaps in recognizable form. And so I'd be guided to different places, and I would meet these different beings, and who very often seemed like to be a mix of different creatures that we have on the planet now. And this is when the information started to come through that these were beings from who had traveled from other galaxies, bringing templates for us as part of creating the Earth, Mother Earth, as part of bringing her into being. And I was told that alchemy was our greatest gift. And so this is where the nature part comes into this path, that alchemy was our greatest gift. It was our greatest invention. So by working with these really eclectic beings from diverse galaxies, from not just from this universe, from other universes. And, you know, once they traveled here, they weren't going home. They were going to stay, you know. So they supported as part of that creational team and bringing in these templates, and the importance of that, of alchemy in the physical sense. And I've spoken about this in some of my other work around the Auroras. Again, because of the connection to the alchemists, is that at that minute level, at that baseline level, when we're bringing something into physical creation, that has the way that the earth is in physical creation. So with all these living beings, with all of these plants, is what do you do with all all the waste, the leaves and, even organic waste in effect. And so these beings, these alchemists, and, the mushrooms as well, the fungi, they are then able to alchemize, to decompose. So whether it's dung beetles, or centipedes, or dragonfly. If you think dragonfly larvae, they live at the bottom of lakes. All of these different creatures have an essential part in that recycling of nutrients, and that so that the waste doesn't build up. So that decomposition happens, and the nutrients are then reused and recycled. And so they are an essential part of nature's cycles and seasons. And so this was the information that started to come through at that point as I was meeting those beings. And alchemy is associated with the violet flame. Yeah, so that's a whole other kind of offshoot of this story, if you like, or at least what has become a big part of my work, the understanding of that. And if you remember, I said about the compass or the medicine wheel being on the roof, okay, of that campsite in Croatia, and the medicine wheel is very, very connected with the seasons, with the cycles, with nature. It's the cycle of life, if you like, in some traditions, the circle of life. So from there, I kind of moved on. There was another place as well where I picked up the white stag, and I spoke about the white stag more in another episode. Again, bringing up the other thread of that story as I've learned to understand that again. Chapel dedicated to Saint Hubert, and at least as he has been seen right within that tradition. So that was that kind of, either side, if you like, of Hungary, sort of almost like that framing that happens again. Okay. And so I continued through Croatia and, meeting these beings, but also just falling in love with the land there. And also what was curious as well, not all beings were there for me to interact with. I saw some really curious things, and my guides made it clear, and it's like, no, that's not for you. So that was, yeah, like I say, very curious. So I carry on my way. I probably had a couple of overnight stops in the end, and I end up on the coast and spent some time in this particular village that I sort of was wandering around. And what do I find there? A chapel dedicated to Mary Magdalene. And oh, here we go again. Picked up another thread of Mary Magdalene. And the information that I had come through at that point was that Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene traveled together. And, this is on the timeline that I was shown. So I'm not saying that this is the right version or anything like that. I can only talk about what I was shown, and I guess the relevance to the work that I was being guided to do. So what I was shown was that that Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary traveled together. And then round about that point in Croatia, they went their separate ways. One of them went over the mountains and the other one followed the coast. And then they met again in France. Okay. So, like I say, that's the information that I have. What's not clear to me is which one went which way. I feel that Mary Magdalene most likely went over the mountains and Mother Mary went along the coast. But also there seems to be this sort of switch up that seems to happen along the routes as well. So it might not have been as linear as that. And what I'm learning in this work is to just accept that information and to get out of the linear brain, whether that's intersecting timelines, intersecting pathways, our limited perspective on what they were capable of. You know, they were following an Essene practice, which the Cathars descended from, if you like. And my sense is because the Cathar presence seems to be more strongly in the mountains, that's why my sense is that that's the route that Mary Magdalene took. And I know that appears to contradict other versions, the little that I know, but I also need to really honor what I've been shown. And you know, the thing is there's room for all truth. So, and from a higher perspective, we may see that in many, many different ways. So there I am on the coast of Croatia and connecting in with the Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary energy, which was very palpable at that point. So I'd spent a few days traveling along the coast, and a lot slower. I spent a couple more days in this village, and just the area was just so beautiful. The light, there's everything about that. And then I was guided to go to the supermarket. I could hear this dragon. I could feel this really strong dragon energy. And this dragon was hungry. And so the next thing I was asked to do is one of probably the most bizarre requests that I have ever had. And to go to the supermarket, I'd actually booked an Airbnb at this point. So, you know, I could charge things up, do some washing and various things. But to go to the supermarket and to buy some food for this dragon. And I bought chicken, chocolate milk and tomatoes were the main request. Okay. So I bought that. I also bought some other, you know, fruit and veg as well, and went back to where I was staying and cooked all of the chicken. And there were some other things. So I kind of gathered all of this stuff. And the other thing that was also really strong in this area was Griffin energy. Now, my maiden name, my birth name is Griffin. So whenever the Griffin energy comes up, I tend to feel a very personal connection to that. I've written about this, but I don't believe this is on my blog as yet. So I'll sort that out at some point and get the link put in. So yeah, so the feeding of the dragons. And so I was sort of driving up the coast, tuning into where Spirit wanted me to stop, and found this place. And so took all of this food and made this mandala. This is as I was guided. There was crystals and other things like, and flowers, and it wasn't, but made this mandala with the chicken and the fruit and the veg, and just laying that out. And then the last thing was to get the chocolate milk and sprinkle it all over. Like, it's one of the most unusual ceremonies that I have ever participated in. But this real deep nourishment that came from that. And I could hear that dragon. I could hear the dragon who had become so dehydrated and so neglected that, this part of Croatia, if you think, it's also a very volcanic area, and the ground's very dry. So it's quite sharp and craggy and deserty almost as well. But I could hear like the dragon's scales rattling against the ground as it rushed in for this food. It was and really and feel the energy, almost feel that dragon breath. And of course at that point, that was when, sort of with respect, I kind of withdrew and left and allowed this creature who hadn't had any offerings for a long time. It was the sense at one point, these offerings to the land, if to the land, were given regularly, in appreciation and that. And then as things change and that's forgotten about, those offerings are no longer given. So this was like this sort of compensation, if you like, for all those forgotten times. Yeah, so that was really curious. That was a fire dragon as well, specifically a fire dragon. Yeah. So all requests are curious in the different ways, but chicken and chocolate milk. Anyhow, I then continue along the coast, and I at some point realized that it was possible. And again, I was going off in one direction, and I was like, no, go down there. And that I realized there's ferry boats to the islands. It took me a while to find the ferry base, but I found it because there's commercial shipping there as well, or small scale commercial. But I found the passenger ferries. The first one I found was just a kind of there and back trip. It was just foot passengers, which was just really magical. So I went on the there and back trip, and I thought that was it. But no, there was another one where I took the car, and crossed over to the islands. Now, I'm hoping that I'm getting this right, but this is how my memory serves me. You could go over to the island and then drive to the other side of the island, and then get another ferry across, and then you're on the peninsula of Croatia. I feel I've got that right, or it might just be across the bay to the peninsula. No, it's not. There's an island in the middle without looking. And do you know what? I have tried to look on a map because someone asked me where it was, and I haven't been able to find this on the map where it was since. So it clearly, that location, there's a reason, there's a kind of almost like a veil over it. And a lot of places, this isn't the first time that I'd come across it. There's a lot of places that have got dragon in the name in other ways. And on this island, someone also had been sticking white stag stickers everywhere on different signs. And so there was this convergence of the white stag and the dragon energy on this island. So, and that's when, as I came on the island and I was moving up, that's when I saw a violet manta ray, like as in a galactic other realm being. It was absolutely enormous. It was probably the size of the bay itself. And so that was another part of, the meeting with these different galactic beings. So I continued like around this island, and there's this mountain. And so my guidance was then to go up the mountain. And this again is where there is room for negotiation. Okay. This is Croatia. It's June, I think, late May, June. It's hot. It's the middle of the day. I have a dog. And though I was putting, stuff on her paws to sort of, prevent her from hurting her paws in the heat. I need to look after her, So we got to this mountain. My guidance was to go up to the mountain. And we were about, wasn't a big mountain. We were about 100 meters from the top. We could see the top, but it was like, I could have continued the journey, but my dog couldn't have done. And there was a lovely little, sort of some conifer trees, and we sat in the conifer trees. And then I had to negotiate with my guides to say, there's absolutely no way that I can go to the top with I can't leave her in the car. It's too hot. There's absolutely no way that I'm going to take her any further. And we had this real discussion. So because I was so close to the top of the mountain and what was needed to be done, one of my guides did the work from the top, and I was able to work from where I was and to sort of connect that way. Okay. And it did take some kind of wriggling around and renegotiation to do that grid work that we needed to do, but it was doable. And this is where we connected in. So if you think this journey so far had in effect been, accessing the grids in many, many different ways. I've only, excuse me, shared a fraction really of what was done. As I said, I only shared the key points. Excuse me. And so these sort of acupressure points, and I was talking about that huge dragon, that sense of, lifting her out. And we'd been like working with all of these other dragon energies, which were part of her community in some way. Okay. The different relationships. And I hadn't, because I was following the guidance, I hadn't fully comprehended, I hadn't put it all together. And suddenly we were there. We were at this point where this is where we release that dragon. This is the access point. And to really connect in with that energy, and to bring that energy back out into the world. Now, that dragon, whether you consider that dragon to be Tiamat or the Dark Mother, the divine crone, as I like to call her, that energy needed to be restored to bring balance to the divine feminine, because it's not all, the dark is luminous. We often use that term dark to mean evil, which is misguiding. That kind of it means density. Okay. But there is the luminous feminine dark, which is beneficial. That there's a lot of belief systems that we still need to collapse around that because of how the feminine's been subjugated. And I mean, literally, okay, in this way. But I'm not going to go into the whole underlying mythos and my understanding of that. Here we were releasing this massive energy back into the world, back into the grids, so that the feminine could come more fully into balance. Okay, the healthy feminine, which then calls the healthy masculine back into balance. So if you think about that, the abundance, the cherry, right? The cherry, it has the seed, the pip, which is the soul. Okay. It's the core purpose, if you like. The walnut, the balancing of the masculine and feminine. And, Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, who were also of dragon lineages, and they walked the dragon path. They walked the dragon lines, as I was first introduced to them, as before I even understood fully about this work. Instead of grid lines, I was told they were dragon lines. So that's what we do. We bring her. We free her. Of course, she has to go through a process after being freed that, of clearing. But what have we done in my journey through Croatia is I'm connecting with all these really bizarre, to my view now, then, intergalactic beings who are skilled alchemists. And so there we are, bringing her and alchemizing any distortion, any density, to sort of bring her into her full luminosity, if you like. And so that was the work that we did there. And that was, if you like, the pinnacle of that journey, but it wasn't the end. And also it wasn't the first time on that journey, or the last time, where I had to have that kind of negotiation. And I was gifted a stone. I've got this beautiful heart-shaped stone from that mountain, as well as sage, which is very precious to me. It was full of sage, for that purification too. So I use that on special occasions, my Croatian sage. And so, yeah, continue on my way, get the ferry over to the peninsula, and then I end up again in other mountains and found this abandoned village. I was guided up there. And there's something very special about that land there too. And I was connecting to other dragons. The dragon that was associated with that island, he was like, he was connected with the sea, so he had plenty of fish. So like that one that was, had been starved further down the coast, and this one who was really kind of fat and nourished, and he was okay, maybe a bit lazy because of it. And there was another one up there. So yeah, this abandoned village was a very interesting place. That I don't really feel called to share anything more about. But it was really interesting that I was guided up there. There was a walk down there, and again, it was sort of a lot more lush. It wasn't dry like the mountain that we'd been on the island. So, there was plenty of like little streams. So it was a nice break to go there. I mean, Croatia has such a variety. It's like it has everything there. And I, yeah, I'd really, I love the land there. It's very special. So from Croatia, my next stop was back to Italy through Slovenia. I spent 40 minutes in Slovenia because I'd spent the time in Croatia. I didn't really have the time to stop in Slovenia. Yeah, next stop, Venice, which was, again, this is, I'll say this bit because, again, I've been on here a long time now. So this was probably one of the most confusing parts of my guidance. There were three ways I could have got to Venice from where I was. I could have driven, which brings its own challenges because of what, Venice is as a tourist destination. I could have got a boat, but I couldn't find a way of bringing my van on the boat, but I could have got a boat. And the other one was to get a coach. And I didn't know which way I was going to go. I knew I would be going one way, even to the point where I was guided to book a coach. And I didn't know until the morning that I was going to drive there. And what I understand it in retrospect is because of the energies that are there, because of the energies that I was working with, it was to stop any interference with me actually getting to Venice. This is turning out to be a marathon, but it was a 3-month journey and it was very rich and there's a lot there. And I also feel that through sharing this, I'm also sharing some of the raw information of, the teachings that I received through that journey, which I hope you find gives you food for thought and some inspiration. Okay, so that's the end of part 3. There is going to be a part 4. I feel there might be more. Thank you ever so much for watching and listening and your patience with this unfolding journey. But I'm really appreciating this opportunity of being able to share this with you. Sending you much love from my heart to yours.